Well, let's start with a little bit about your dad. Tell us who your father was.
Well, my memories of my dad, Steve Rush, Stephen Arthur Rush, are are all memories that came from other people and stories I've heard because he died when I was 3 years old. So I don't have any of my own memories. And so my memory is built with others, which is pretty special. And so what I know about my dad is continuing it's a continuing story for me to get to know him. But he was um, lived in Lambertville, New Jersey, with my grandparents, and he was adopted and had older brother, older sister. He was the youngest. And what I know about him is he was a free spirit and a wanderer and a musician and an artist and really smart, gentle human being. He met my mom in college at Drew University, and he had a interest in fast, sexy cars. And I don't remember what car he had at the time, but I remember my mom telling me stories of, she saw him drive by and this amazing convertible sports car, and that was it. And they met in college, and I do know he spent a good deal of time traveling and playing in coffee shops and, he played 12 string guitar, he played banjo, harmonica. And so I know that he traveled the country, the US, one summer, in a converted mail truck that he converted into a camper with his friend Stuart Nordheimer, and went and played coffee shops. And he did enlist in the Vietnam War. He didn't want to go. He had a low draft number, and so he knew he was going to be drafted anyway. And from the stories that my mom tells me, he elected to enlist because he knew he was going to have to go anyway. And so he wanted to get an education. He wanted to learn. And if he was going to go, he wanted to make the most of it. And so he enlisted in officer training school and eventually became a pilot and weapons operator for the F-4 Phantom. And he went to Vietnam,
Mm.
and he didn't come home. And so my memory of him, he was shot down in 72 over the Ho Chi Minh Trail near a small village in Laos called Ta Oi. And we had those map coordinates. There were excavations that happened, of course, many years later. His remains were never found. There were two excavations, and I can't remember the exact years. The first excavation, they found plane parts, ejection seats, but no human remains from my dad or Carter Howell, who was his co-pilot. And they went back again and did another excavation, and in 2007 is when they finally found two teeth from two teeth at the crash site in the excavation. And those teeth came back. And my sister, who's a two-star general in the Air Force, she followed in my dad's footsteps. She's also a periodontist and has a dental background. Because of her clearance, she was actually able to go and look at the remains and help verify that, yes, in fact, with his dental records, those were in fact my dad's teeth. And that was 2007. And they didn't find any remains, and still have not yet found any remains of Carter Howell. And so, yeah, it's a long journey to find out, not until 2007, that he had actually died that day in that crash. And that started, of course, a ceremony and a burial in Arlington, and the full military honors, and that process started. For me, 2007 is really when the process started of, well, actually before that, 2002 is the first time I went to Vietnam. And as an athlete, as a professional athlete, I went there for a race. And it was a multi-day adventure race through the jungles of Vietnam. And it was hot and humid and really difficult conditions. And being in that place was the first time I had a really strong curiosity about my father and what he went through, and what all the soldiers went through, of walking through the mud and being immersed in the jungle. And of course, we weren't being shot at, we were being chased by competitors. So there was this sort of sense of survival. And I don't want to compare it in any way as if it was what the soldiers went through, but being immersing in the place really helped me start to feel connected to him. And my mom met me over there after that race in 2002, and we did a tour. And we went to Da Nang Air Force Base where he was stationed. We went to the Hanoi Hilton where POWs were kept, and we know those kinds of stories. We went to the DMZ, the border between North and South, and we went to Khe Sanh, which is, one of the bloodiest battles of the war. And I remember with our guide standing on the grounds of Khe Sanh, and it's a beautiful coffee plantation right now, and the jungle has recovered. And our guide, a Vietnamese guide, pointed over towards Laos, and he said, "Over there, that's the Ho Chi Minh Trail." And that really hit me because I didn't know much about my dad other than he was shot down over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I just kept hearing that. I didn't really know about the trail, what it was. And as an adventure athlete and explorer, that guide pointing and saying, "There's that trail," there was a part of me that just, I knew one day I would go to the trail. And this was 2002, long before I was mountain biking. And I took a picture that day. I remember, I still have the photo, and took a picture over there. And there was that really opened my curiosity for two reasons. One, physically being in the place and feeling a presence, and also my mom opening up and telling stories about what her experience was like, and that the letters that she got from the Vietnam War came from this place. And this is where he took his days off, his R&R, on China Beach. And that was the first time I felt connected to him. And I know it's because I was standing in places where he had been. There was a part of me when he had his ceremony at Arlington and the burial, I didn't feel him there. I didn't feel his presence. And it was a beautiful ceremony and honor, but I just stood there feeling kind of empty, and not feeling his presence in any way. What I felt that day were the veterans who were on the periphery, on the sideline. And I remember looking around and wondering who were the people sort of standing back in the background. And I felt more connected to sort of the people in the background than I did to what was happening in front of me. And that was the first day I met Joe Leone, who served with my dad. And that was the first day in Arlington where I didn't feel connected to my dad, but I saw all those other veterans who came that day. Some knew him, some didn't. And that was powerful for me to see that people who went through a similar experience, how did they know that today was the day he was being buried? How did this community was so connected? And I went over to them with my arms folded across my chest, in sort of a defensive posture, and looked at all of these men in their jackets and with their patches, and just kind of was curious about them. And Joe Leone came up to me and said, "I'm Joe Leone. I served with your dad. I was the one who," he was the clerk there, and he said, "I was the one who sent your dad's letters home. He actually sealed the envelopes and sent them to us." And it wasn't until years later that Joe and I became close, but I remember him coming and talking to us, and he remembers me just being kind of standoffish because I wasn't ready yet. I wasn't ready to learn about my dad. And so Arlington was kind of a first clue. Being in his burial, being in Vietnam was another clue that there was a curiosity. There was there was going to be more to this story, but I didn't quite know how it was going to unfold. And 20 2015 was really when I finally put together an expedition and took a journey to ride my bike the entire length of the Ho Chi Minh Trail and really go deep into this story. And
And you were the first person to do that, right?
I think I'm the first person to ride the trail from end to end, the entire length through Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. I put together as historically accurate of a path as I could, because as people may or may not know, the Ho Chi Minh Trail was the supply route that moved troops and supplies from north to south. And it was a vast network of trails. There's not just one trail. It's a massive network that moved supplies and people through the jungle. And so I did a lot of studying. I reached out to people in Laos and found a amazing mapper over there, Don Duval, who on his motorcycle, he's an American expat. He spent years there GPS mapping Laos, places that had never actually been mapped. And we put together a historically accurate route and of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and I went to ride it and went to those map coordinates that we got in the documents from the government were quite official, and they had map coordinates, and there were actually two different map coordinates of the crash, and so it took quite a bit of research and digging to find the right information, to get pictures of the excavations, and to piece together this journey that one, it is my career, decades long career as an ultra endurance athlete. I was using what I know to connect with my dad in the only way that I know how, to put together an incredible adventure, but with a very magnetic pull for these map coordinates for me to go there. I had to go there. I didn't know it my entire life, but I think I've been leading to that moment and that ride. I've been practicing for it my whole life in being a professional athlete, learning how to read maps and plan expeditions and ride for thousands of miles. It was all in preparation of getting to know my dad and getting to meet my dad. And that was a really a pivotal moment in my life. But I can look back now and see all those little pieces that were leading me there and taking me there.
Mm. Yeah, I'm curious. First of all, the story of that ride is just beautifully told in the film Blood Road, which I've now seen twice. Definitely recommend that to our listeners. Do you know what your father studied at Drew?
Oh, I think it might have been engineering, like electrical engineering. My mom's going to kill me for not knowing the answer to this. But no, I don't remember what he studied.
Do you remember how? Do you know how he got into aviation?
You know, I have to assume, and again, this is great that you're asking me these questions, because these are questions I need to ask my mom,
Yeah.
and I need to continue to build my memory. And it's not it's a continuing education, and I have to assume his interest in cars and electronics and how machines worked were probably what led him into being interested in airplanes. And I do know that he was an incredible student. He did really well. He got great scores in officer training school. And it's coming back to me now too. He really excelled in language, and so he was actually learning to be a translator. He was learning Russian to work in the radios, and so there was an aspect to language to what he was learning as well. So thank you for asking that question. So that's a question I'll ask my mom as soon as we get off with you. And I mean, if people are listening to this, I think one thing that has really been impactful for me is that there are so many questions, and I do know people came home from the Vietnam War and for decades since, that the questions weren't asked and people didn't talk about the experience. And it's part of the magic of, I discovered this in film touring with Blood Road. And, it's a story of healing. And many people came, veterans, families who saw the film and seemed grateful to be able to express their feelings, to hug, to talk about my experience. Blood Road is just my experience, but it seems to resonate with many people who've been touched by war. All of us have been touched by war, and I've really been struck by the fact that it's time to ask the questions, and it's time to have an open discussion about the scars and the fog and the pain and the hurt. Because what has happened for me, my experience, I kind of liken it, going back to Laos and digging into my dad's history was not an easy path for my family. And when I started asking again and digging, it was quite painful for my mom to relive it, for my uncles and cousins who remember. It was not an easy story, but it needed to happen because it had been pushed under the carpet for too long. And the comparison that I can make, it was like re-breaking a bone that didn't heal right so that it could heal properly now. And the break was hard when I was like, I'm going to do this project. We're going to go, you know, my sister was involved in all of it, my mom, and it was quite painful for all of us. And I almost gave up on the trip a couple of times because it seemed too hard and too painful, and people didn't want to talk, or I could tell it was hurtful, and I didn't want to hurt my family and I didn't want to hurt. But I'm glad I pushed through because now the bone has healed more correctly and a little more straight, and it wasn't going to if we just kept ignoring the path. And so me riding Blood Road, riding the Ho Chi Minh Trail, it was an incredible journey for me, but it's also offered healing and discussion for so many other people that I never knew, I may never meet. And that's the importance of storytelling and not forgetting, because we do learn from our history. I'm learning from my dad every day and from the people who knew him.
Mm. Yeah, it sounds like when you were growing up, this isn't something that you and your family discussed an awful lot.
Growing up, I never, I was so young, and my sister was 6 when he was shot down, and I was, just about 3. And so I didn't have my own memories. And when people would say to me as a young kid, like, oh, it's so terrible, you're growing up without a father, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And I don't really know how to respond, because for me, you can't miss what you don't know, and you can't love what you don't know. And so as a kid, this was my life growing up with my mom and my sister. I didn't know anything different. I think for my sister, it was harder because she remembered him and she had memories of spending time with them. And so I think it was more painful for her in our childhood years. For me, I was kind of oblivious, and he was a two-dimensional shape on some pictures on some pages. My grandmother would tell me stories and kind of look at me in my face and say that she saw him in me, and she would cry and look at my hands and say, your hands are just like his. And but as a kid, I didn't know how to respond to that. I didn't have the tools. And my mom has said, why didn't you ask the questions? Why didn't you want to know more? And I wasn't ready. I didn't know the questions to ask as a kid. And it wasn't until well into my adult years, as we've talked about, that I started to be curious and want to know more about who I am and what is in my DNA. And it's not that I didn't want to know about my dad as a child. I just didn't I didn't know any better. I mean, I did when I would visit my grandma, that's where I would feel him the most, because they still lived in Lambertville, New Jersey, in the same home that he grew up in. And so I would go sit in his bedroom and she'd tell me this is where he slept. This is where he grew up. He played his music up here. And I would sit in those rooms and read my book and just kind of hang out. And I always felt comfortable there. I always loved visiting my grandma and going and staying in those rooms. But I think I felt safe and comfortable, but I still wasn't ready to explore. And that's why, I mean, my bicycle, my career, and being an athlete, it's kind of a beautiful story that that's eventually what I do for my profession, and my love and joy eventually brought me to my dad and took me on two wheels to the place to get to know him.
Mm. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Downers Grove, Illinois,
Mm.
Chicago suburbs. And yeah, it was a great place to grow up. And every summer we'd go to New Jersey and visit my grandparents, and they're passed away now. But those are really fun summertime memories of, they had a big, beautiful house that was on a large piece of property. And, there was a little lake where my dad would fish and my grandpa would take me fishing. And so I got to spend time in my childhood where he spent his childhood. And that was really special for my grandparents and it was special for me, but I didn't really know yet why it was so special. I just loved being outdoors. I loved kind of all the things that he loved. I loved wandering around in the woods, playing with the dogs they had. And I can see now that my grandma and grandpa saw that sort of outdoor, curious, wandering spirit in me that my dad had. And I know that now from stories of what he was like. So, yeah, those were fun times. But yeah, I grew up in Chicago suburbs with my mom and my sister, and my mom never remarried. And, she built a career and raised two kids on her own, which wasn't an easy path for her. And I really have to give her credit for doing a really good job. I mean, she raised world champion athlete and a two-star general on her own. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's impressive. And
What's your mom's
even
name?
now, when we talk about my dad, it's hard for her to talk about it. It's so long ago, but it shaped her entire future. It shaped us, that experience.
Yeah. What's her name?
Judy.
Judy. Well done, Judy. Um, as far as you can remember when you were growing up, did did your family have any connection at all with other MIA families? Did you feel like connected to anyone else
No,
who was going through a similar experience?
no, growing up, mom was working, we were going to school. I I wasn't connected to other families who had family members missing or prisoners of war. I do remember growing up, I had nightmares and dreams about my dad, and they were reoccurring dreams. And I I would dream that I was meeting him one day in a coffee shop where I was an adult. He, of course, was the age of the pictures that I've always seen him, and I'd have this reoccurring dream of meeting in a coffee shop and telling him all about my life and telling him what I was doing, and him sitting across the table smiling and just being proud of me. And I had those dreams. And I did wonder, is he alive? Did he have a family in Vietnam? Because we've all read those stories. Did he move on without us? And or was he a prisoner of war? Was he suffering somewhere? And there, in the back of my head, I thought about that occasionally. It would pop into my subconscious and then float away. And then in 2007, when we knew that he had died, there was a sense of, died in the crash. Then there was a sense of relief for me. I remember feeling, well, I'm glad he didn't suffer, but that was kind of it. and we weren't connected to other POW MIA families. It wasn't until much later that I even learned what a Gold Star family is. And after riding the Ho Chi Minh Trail and being there, that's where I started to connect with this family that I didn't know that I had, of other members who have lost someone. My sister volunteers at the wall. I started volunteering at the wall and spending time there. And for me, discovering that other family that I didn't know I had was really healing. And so many people talk about being at the wall, whether they've lost someone in the Vietnam War or not. And it's a very healing place. And I realize now how bottled up, um, our family, me, how bottled up we kept this emotion. And it wasn't serving us. And I didn't know, as a kid, I didn't know what I was bottling up. And it wasn't really until that day at Arlington, when I saw those veterans standing there, that was the first glimmer of, this is bigger than just me and my dad and my family. And and there's some connection that I'm missing. And I now know that. I now have lots of uncles in their 70s, from the Vietnam War, people that served with my dad, people at the New Jersey Vietnam Veterans chapter. They all came to a screening of Blood Road, all the volunteers at the wall that my sister is connected with. So, and yeah, learning that I'm a Gold Star family member, and I was so naive, I didn't know what that was. And still learning that they're still looking for people. Carter Howell's remains were never found, my dad's co-pilot. I know what happened that day, and I talked to the village chief, and his father remembers, and told him the story of the crash that day. And when I came home, I found Carter's family, and I reached out and found his daughter, and told her the story. So she knows that her dad also died in the crash that day. And that was an important job for me to do. And they won't find his remains. They're not excavating that site anymore. And they don't need to, because I was told, from the villagers, exactly what happened, and that there were two American soldiers, and they buried the bodies there with respect, and that they died that day. And I remember talking to her and getting her on the phone, and she just said to me, I've been waiting for this phone call my whole life. And it was an honor to be able to tell her what happened.
You still in touch with her?
Lightly in touch with her, yeah.
Mm.
um I mean, people have their own process, and really it took a while to get through. Carter's daughter, she didn't necessarily want to talk to me right away, and I understand, because I didn't want to talk about my dad until well into my 40s. um so there's a timeline, and people need to move on their own timeline. I i think one of my proudest achievements in my life, more than any world championship or anything else, was being able to make the film Blood Road, and to tell my story, and to be able to share that with other people and help them heal and forgive, and connect with a family that is there waiting for them. And to also know, hopefully know, that people who are gone are still so much a part of us, and still so much. My dad is teaching me every day. I feel him every day, and I can look back now and know he was there during my childhood at certain moments, but I wasn't aware of it. And so my proudest achievement is being able to do that ride and tell the story and have a film to share it, because it helps other people. It didn't just heal me, it's healing others. And so I'm
Right.
pretty
And
happy that we were able to do that.
yeah. And one of the striking things about the movie is that it's, it doesn't just focus on your loss of your father, or even more generally on American losses, right? There's a very sincere acknowledgement of the losses on the other side as well in the film.
Well, and I rode with Huen Nguyen, who is a Vietnamese cyclist, very decorated Vietnamese cyclist, and barely spoke English. And her father experienced the war on their side that they call the American War. And yeah, riding with her was a really important factor in me understanding two sides of the same story and us riding the same trail and really becoming sisters and friends even without language and with you know a devastating shared experience. And they call the Ho Chi Minh Trail Blood Road because so many people died there and there was so much bloodshed. And but I came away from it feeling like it's our blood, our connectivity to family, and thinking of Blood Road in that way, because that is what I've gained from it, is a connection to my blood family, but also a family that I didn't know that I had, and to the Vietnamese people and the Lao people along the trail, and my mission to help clear up the bombs that are still there. And so Blood Road for me doesn't signify the loss and the death that happens there, but it signifies the connection of family.
Mm. It just occurred to me, one of the things about being Rebecca Rusch is preparation, right? Everything is preparation. You talked about mapping, you talked about the expedition planning, right? You got to think about when and where to resupply. So I don't know how long it took you to plan that that ride of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, but I would imagine that it was planned about as thoroughly as anything you've ever done in your life. And yet there were surprises. What were some of the big surprises for you?
I planned for 3 years to try to do that ride, and it unfolded beautifully. And honestly, 1,200 miles through the jungle, literally using machetes to get through in some places. The riding and that part of it was the easy part for me. The hard part was the emotional part and being open with people there. I'm a very private person, and doing interviews every night after the ride and talking about the experience and trying to talk to Huen. The emotional sort of openness was very challenging for someone like me who's an athlete, and I'm built to put up this exterior, to be tough, to be resilient, to not show any weakness. And that it was really hard to be that open. It was a very new experience for me, but I knew it wasn't about me. I knew that just being open was actually the best way to go. I didn't know why. I just knew that I couldn't hold anything back. And that shown in the film, that I was quite vulnerable, and that's what touches people. But the surprises along the trail, the biggest one is, well, two. One, how welcomed I was into this place where my father was bombing. And you imagine if someone came and knocked on your door and said, in your backyard, my family was dropping bombs here and creating devastation. Can I come on in and take a look? And if you put it in that context, it's so amazing how welcoming and friendly the Southeast Asian people are. The Vietnamese, Lao, Cambodian. I was welcomed with open arms and supported. With Huen being on a mission for me to find my father, when my father was one of the people dropping bombs on their country. But learning that the past is the past, and the way forward is to honor the past but let go of it, because holding animosity towards what happened, Huen and I, we weren't there, we weren't part of it, but we can be part of the future. And just two women riding together, to me, was a big eye-opener in forgiveness, and forgiving people for the past, and moving towards the future. A big part of that was discovering all of the unexploded ordnance that are still left. I didn't know what UXO meant. It was so naive. And discovering that 50 years later, bombs are still killing people, that there are cluster munitions that didn't explode, and villagers are injured and die every year in vast numbers. That was a shock to me, to see on the ground the devastation and to know that the bombs are still killing people. And I distinctly feel so clearly that my dad's message to me was to use my reach and the sort of public figure that I am as an athlete, but to use my athletic prowess and to use my bike to do more. And that's where I started after I came back from that. Finding out about the unexploded ordinance, I knew I had to do something. And I started the Be Good Foundation in his name. I started collaborating with Article 22, which is a group that helps clear bombs and takes the war aluminum and makes bracelets out of them. Bracelets, jewelry, the earrings I'm wearing are all made from unexploded ordnance that are safely cleared. And I work with Mines Advisory Group in this aspect. And the Be Good Foundation is all about using my bike for healing, empowerment, and evolution. And it's named the Be Good Foundation after my dad. Those are the words that he wrote in his letters home from the Vietnam War. He signed every letter with the words "Be Good." And so his handwriting is our logo. And that's really my mission statement from him. And those are my instructions for my dad: to be good as an athlete, as a human, as a family member, as a Gold Star family member. So yeah, that's my mission now, is to be good, thanks to my dad.
Mhm. You talked about how difficult or uncomfortable it was for you to adopt sort of a posture of openness, right? A mindset of openness, and an emotion set of openness on this ride. Once you open up like that, you tend to stay that way. Have you found that you're more open since then?
I am more open in discussing, how I'm feeling or what happened with our family. Um, and because I see that almost every time when I'm honest and open, there's a reward. Someone gives you a hug or someone says thank you. And as humans, we are taught to build this super tough exterior and to think that, you know we're independent and we can handle anything. And I grew up in a single parent household where we did have to be independent. My mom was at work all day and we had to take care of ourselves. And I'm grateful to have learned that skill of resilience and independence and taking care of myself. But I think the other side, in my dad's DNA that wasn't as developed was the gentle musician, the artist, the sort of that other side of me was less developed as I was growing up as an athlete and entrepreneur and very much type A go-getter. And what I'm learning from my dad is the flip side of that, and slowing down a little, being gentle, having some openness. And it's not easy because we do all want to protect ourselves. There's a protective measure that we put around ourselves. But honestly, as I said before, the way to heal a wound is to actually open it up and clean it out a little and put some bandages on it. And it is the way for me to heal. It's not easy, it's still a practice, but that's why I go back to places like the wall. That's why I go do speeches with my sister. That's why we're talking today. This is part of my healing, but it's also part of everyone else's healing.
Mm. Last night, after I finished my second viewing of Blood Road, I watched your TEDx Sun Valley. presentation for the first time. I hadn't seen that before, and it is just sort of, it's sort of jaw dropping, the difference uh, in you, right? Anyway, there's not a question anywhere in your future about that, but I just I wanted to make that observation, right? That as a viewer, I sort of felt like I got to know you a little bit watching Blood Road, and then when I watched your TEDx presentation, I felt like that was a completely different person.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah, that there was I mean, you could see the journey toward
Yeah,
that person in
yeah.
Blood Road, but the TEDx presentation was, I mean, that was just raw. I mean, you don't get more open than that.
That was the first time I spoke openly about the trip. I mean, you can imagine you come home from a journey like that. We were a month in the jungle on the trail, and I came back from that ride quite lost. And even though I'd found my dad, I had had an amazing journey. It took me years to process what that trip meant. And I feel like I'm just getting there now. And when I did that TEDx, that was shortly after the trip, the first time I'd spoken publicly about the experience I had. And I was still trying to process what it all meant, and what being in that place meant to me. And I really think about, I've lived out of my car like my dad, and I've traveled all around, and been a bit of a wanderer and not had a sense of home for most of my life. And being in Laos and Vietnam, and I really started to understand the importance of place and the importance of standing on the ground somewhere that feels like home. And that's where I felt, standing by the tree where my dad died, is I felt a sense of place. And when I talked about coming back from that trip in the TEDx talk, that's what was really resonating with me, is finding home in our hearts and finding a comfortable place in our hearts where, geographically doesn't matter where you are. It helps geographically, and that's why I go to nature. It's why I ride my bike. It's why I go to these, on these long expeditions, is a sense of physical place helps me find my home emotionally on the inside. And the wall is that for people. That's a place where other people can connect internally by going somewhere externally. And so for anyone who's trying to heal for anything, find the place, the physical place, whether it's nature, whether it's, going on a trip somewhere, or whether it's your backyard, creating a little sanctuary, a place where you can physically go to feel at home emotionally. And that's kind of was the gist of that TED talk, of like finally feeling home. Like my dad was home, I was home with him, and this big empty piece that had been missing, that I was unaware of, was finally back and connected to me again.
Mm. And it's been an amazing journey for you to sort of, you know, put together the mosaic of your father, right? Well, I mean, he's one of those rare people, I think, who has both sides of the brain fully developed, right? On one side, the very, the engineering uh, geek, and then on the other side, I'm going to go travel around in my van and play music.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not often that you see people um, who are that wide, that broad. Um, and it sounds like as you learn more about your father on this journey, you've discovered some breadth that maybe you didn't know that you had. I'm wondering, how much of that came from people like Joe Leone and people who knew your father, people you've met who served with your father.
All of my memories come from of my father come from other people. They come from my grandmother, they come from Joe Leone, they come from my mom. um, and really, Joe's the last person who saw dad alive. and he remembers the day that they went off on that mission. He tells me that, a lot of the pilots were real arrogant and kind of, thought they were pretty special. But he said my dad, wasn't like that. He was friendly to everyone, and he talked to everyone, and he really liked my dad, and he remembers just him being very open and friendly, um, and I think the story is too that actually dad had taken this flight for someone else. Someone had was sick or had something happen, and so dad didn't normally fly with Carter Howell, and this mission was he was filling in for somebody else, and taking an extra shift, so to speak. And yeah, Joe remembers them heading out, and then he also remembers getting the news and hearing about it. And Joe was one of the first people that I saw that I showed an early cut of Blood Road before it was released, and I sat in a small screening room with him. And when you see the film, you see the actual letters from my dad that my mom kept, that Joe sent home to us, and sitting next to this man who physically sent these letters home, and then him seeing the product of what those letters meant to the family, and how they were coming out in the world now. you know I was so proud to be able to share that with him. I feel like he's my uncle, and that was my gift back to him. His gift was sending those letters and building my memory of my dad, and my gift back to him was showing him that yes, this is worth it. What you do, what you did, is important, and he's become an important part of our family. He was just in attendance. My sister just got pinned on for her second star, 2-star general, and Joe was there at the ceremony with us, and it was really special to have him there.
Isn't that something? I've been thinking about your mom a lot lately, as I've been doing research for this interview, and everybody has their own way of dealing with loss and dealing with grief. I think, it appears to me that in your mom's case, maybe she didn't have the luxury of fully indulging her sense of loss or grief because she was busy raising a world-class athlete and a 2-star general and building a career of her own. But in the years since you've started your journey, she's had a front row seat. And I'm wondering, what's the effect of your journey that you've seen on your mother, on Judy?
I think you're right in the fact she didn't have time to mourn or to talk to anyone. She just had to work. She had to raise 2 kids. And the journey of this film tour and Blood Road and telling this story, going to the wall, I know that's been healing for her too. And it's not been an easy process, but it has connected us in a way that we weren't connected before, and it's allowed her to tell her stories through the making of the film, to talk about what my dad was like, what it was like receiving that letter and having military come to the door and tell her the news. And she's been able to talk about it, I think, for the first time in her life. And it's brought us closer, and I hope that it's brought her some healing, um, as well. I know it has. There's still more questions I need to ask her. As you found out, I need to ask what my dad studied in college. And yeah, it's a thing that we share now, that we didn't have before.
Mm. And is she still in Illinois?
She's in Illinois. Yeah, she's
Yeah.
still there.
You get up there often?
And what's we saw it, well, she was just at my sister's ceremony for her promotion, and so we did just see her recently, which is pretty great.
Yeah. You mentioned that you learned the story of the crash and you were able to tell the story, fill in some blanks, for the daughter of the other aviator who was killed in that crash. Um, Do you mind telling it here? Is there anything to say that you haven't already said about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, we had poured over the reports of the crash, of the excavation. I even got to talk to the man who was the pilot who was in the second plane, who saw my dad's plane go down. He remembers writing that report after coming back to base. And so we had all of those kind of that kind of information, the technical information. But when I went to Laos, to this village of Taoy, and the place where my dad's plane went down, the map coordinates, you have to ask permission there. You don't just wander around in the woods. And so we went to the village chief and asked permission to go to this place, and would he take us. And as it turned out, I didn't know any of this, but the village chief of Taoy, and they live in small thatched huts. There's no plumbing, no running water. We sit in this hut, meet this kind, gentle man who, the moment I saw him, our eyes locked, and I didn't know for what reason, but I just felt a connection to him. And then as he started to tell the story through a translator, it turns out his father was the village chief at the time. His mom was pregnant with him at the time of the crash. And his father and another Lao villager, they waited for the bombing to stop for days, and then went out to the site of the crash to see if there were any survivors. And they found two American bodies. They were dead. And his father and the other Lao villager, they buried my father and Carter Howell. They moved their bodies under this tree and buried them. And Mr. Air, the son who was in his mom's belly at the time, he told me the story that his mom and dad told him. And he said that the shaman of this village had told his mother, when one spirit dies, another is born, and that this spirit will be born in your son. And Mr. Air pointed and told me that story, and he pointed at me and said, "You and I are brother and sister. I knew you would come here." And I mean, I just sat there in awe and disbelief that he already knew I was coming. He said he'd had dreams about someone coming. And also the fact that the kindness that his father buried my father, and even people that were dropping bombs were treated with respect and given an honest burial. And the reason the excavation, I can see it now. We had pictures of the excavation, and you see the little markings of like where the crash site was, where they dug. There's tape around, and just outside of their excavation zone, the tape is the tree that I found and the place where Mr. Air told me that his father buried the bodies. So they had moved the bodies downstream under a tree, and that's why the remains weren't found. It explains it to me so clearly, and it's so obvious, and so beautiful to hear the story personally from the son of the guy who was there, who experienced it all. And just the connectivity that we have for him to say, I knew you were coming. And I've been back 4 times since, and every time he says, he smiles and he's not surprised. He said, "I had a dream. I knew you were coming back." And it's he is my brother. We do have a shared family history in a very unique way. And the power of energy and spirit is, it's something that can't be explained. And I think anyone who goes to the wall or who goes to places, like I said, that are meaningful for you, we feel other people there, we feel energy there. And this is why I'm so grateful to be part of this, POW MIA Gold Star family, is because I do believe that energy that we all share together by being open, it does help us heal. And we are we are moving forward together as a family and as a team because of the energy and the experience that we share. And I may never see Mr. Air again. I don't know when I'll get back to Laos, to that place, but he's a part of me. And he's this kind, gentle, beautiful man. And he's got children of his own. And he promised me, that he'll never cut that tree down where my dad is buried. And I believe him. And so that is my, Arlington. That's where I go if I can, to connect with my dad. And to me, that's where he is more strongly than anywhere else.
Mm, mm. Was there anything else, Rebecca, that you feel like we didn't cover thoroughly, or anything you want to add that I failed to ask?
I don't know, your questions were great.
Well, thank you. Um, it's a it's an easy story to get interested in. Um, I guess I do have one last question for you. Is there a musical bone in your body?
Musical bone. I'm trying. I got a ukulele after I got a 1960s. I wanted to get a vintage instrument, ukulele, and I wanted to learn some music, and it in honor of my dad. So I can play a few chords. I sing a little bit. I'm not talented in the way that he was, but yeah, I've learned to play some of the folk songs that he sang, and um, I'm trying. I know
Mm,
one song pretty well, "Where I'm Bound." I play that one when I need to sort of center and heal. But yeah, he has gotten me back into music. I used to play as a kid. I used to play piano and was in the band and stuff like that, but never played guitar or string instruments. So I got a small ukulele in his honor, and I play that every once in a while.
mm. So tell me about the recording that we're going to hear of your dad singing and playing "Where I'm Bound."
Yeah, my dad was a folk singer. He loved Bob Dylan and Pete Seeger, and you know that, and I listen to that kind of music all the time now. And my mom, she was a bit of a groupie, and she recorded one of his concerts that he did in a coffee shop, and um, it was a fundraising event. And she explains that she had one of those big huge recording devices that, with the reels going around, that she brought in, and she recorded him and Stuart Nordheimer, his best friend, recorded them playing. And one of the songs that really resonates with me is um, a song called "Can't Help But Wonder Where I'm Bound," and it sticks with my head in my head all the time. And it talks about people wandering and not knowing where they're going, and feeling lost or in pain. And then ultimately the last verse is about coming home, and being home, and finding a place where you can be at home. And so each of those verses, they really resonate with me, that we are all wandering, we're all a little lost, but eventually we find love and friendship, and we come home. And so the song's pretty special to me. The recording is the only time I've heard my dad's voice, and so I listen to it a lot. It does help me.
Do you know where it was recorded?
They say at the beginning of the concert, I think it was in New Jersey. I'll
It
find
sounds
out
like
where.
it's in a coffee house or someplace, because there's
Oh, it's
there's
absolutely in a
audience
public.
noises and applause and
Yeah, it's in a public place. I think it's in New Jersey. I think it was during college, and his friend Stuart Nordheimer. He's also one that I've gotten really close to through this process, and we email and talk frequently. He'll send me a memory of dad every couple weeks or so. He'll remember something and send me a memory. So he's been also a big part in connecting me with my father, and he checks in to make sure I'm practicing the ukulele. And yeah, that's been a really great friendship that came from, his best friend has now become one of my best friends.